let's start rolling. I think let's move a little bit closer so that we are in the visible. Wait a minute, I thought you should be able to see the whole thing, all right? You should be able to see the whole thing. Okay, so it doesn't have to be off center. Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. I feel silly wearing the headset because for some reason I was just listening to stuff. But now I'm gonna remove it, and I hope you guys are doing well. It's been a while since I posted some updates, specifically. The fascination of this week has been particularly around McLaren's. I don't know why this sudden love for McLaren's emerged, and I am kind of exploring around, and I'll be in Charlotte, specifically looking for McLaren's to possibly purchase, and and in the light of marketing the product that I've been pushing out. If you aren't aware, I recently launched a platform called Hypermarket, which is essentially a tokenized trading platform, and essentially it allows you to trade tokenized stocks. In the current moment, it's mostly for educational purposes only, and I think this is some kind of dream of mine to push out a product that I have always used as a terminal. And I feel like it is kind of a long-standing terminal, even moving forward 100 years in the age of superintelligence. And just to recap as well, I launched a venture firm called AT Capital, which is focused on capital superintelligence, and essentially capital superintelligence, as it's defined, is a composition of capital, which is a combination of people plus a unit of value in the form of token. And superintelligence is, of course, a magnificent level of intelligence that allows people kind of to transcend beyond the ordinary outcomes that we experience on the day-to-day. So that's kind of the overarching thesis that I want to lay out with the whole venture firm. And I have been kind of trying in the essentially arena trying to explore what companies could really fit this description, and definitely looking forward to writing checks and investing in these companies. Specifically, I've definitely been eyeing Servomind. Servomind was one of the companies that I was introduced to while I was in Miami. A group of brilliant PhD folks with expertise in hyperdimensional computing have achieved like a state-of-the-art way to compress model and or data that are used during model pre-training, and I was quite surprised to even run into those people. It was quite serendipitous, but I was fortunate enough to meet these people, and also like kind of my focus has been to expand the internal domain, which I have been actively working internally. So I'm going to push out exciting updates, but primarily the most exciting update so far is Hypermarket, which is something I've been trying to actively push. And essentially, Hypermarket is a futures trading platform that allows you to, well, trade perpetual contracts for stocks, specifically in the form of tokens. So this is something interesting, and also crypto assets as well. So you could be able to find your edge, trade your niche, and sharpen your skills when it comes to like increasing your ability to earn in the market. And I'm kind of excited to do this because I've always wanted to own a platform that allows this, and I finally built up the courage to build one. And this is such an exciting moment. So yeah, that's primarily it, and mostly been recapping inference processing units as well. I met a friend who was a process integration engineer and got some feedback on what inference processing units, how I could build one. I do have a complete blueprint of the vision of what it looks like. And if you're still wondering what inference processing units are, inference processing units is a term that I came up with to describe these somewhat modular or non-modular chiplets that allow you to run inference modules or become an inference module themselves, and can be a standalone inference module that could replace a computer. And that's kind of the goal here. And the overarching statement or thesis is that there is a duality between computers and models. And as I have said in the past, the computer is the model and the model is the computer. And we certainly want that flipping to happen. And with that, I think the next thing that I see as a point of research or a point of worth exploring from my direction is that specifically. And one of the thoughts that immediately popped up in my head is that it's particularly the case that I don't know if you've looked into low power computing or low power devices. If you've seen on TikTok or whatever, there are like a few inference modules where they bake in an LLM and a battery, and then they crank it up. So essentially, they put in an LLM similar to ChatGPT or whatever, and they essentially use that as a doomsday device, essentially. And that is such an important and foundational thought, because it's kind of preserving knowledge in the most condensed format possible, and while still being able to recover information in very arid conditions. So it was something interesting that I came across, and somehow I kind of interlinked or connected with my goal of building an inference module. I think that could be a good starting point. And on that's kind of on the applied side of things, but on the realistic implementation of an inference module with no need for clusters. One startup that I've mentioned in the past videos is specifically Etched. And after looking at Etched does more of a cluster or an inference cluster that they have achieved in somewhat of a rack. So in similar to how things kind of get compressed, I feel like the next Moore's law for the inference space would be how much trillion parameters can you pack in a single millimeter square area of a chip or a chipset, and having to bake that in. I feel like that is the next Moore's law that still we might need to kind of invent better ways to do or to achieve this. One thing that stood out for me is low voltage inference, which was very interesting because or low voltage computing, which makes sense because in these cases, you want to have minimal power draw as well. And I definitely have laid out the vision. So go visit ipu.atcap.com, which is under the subdomain of atcap, the venture firm that I mentioned before. If you go ahead and visit there, you should be able to get a full detailed breakdown of the vision of the inference processing unit and the computer that can process information with the LLM as being the core substrate or the core processing unit. And with that, I can definitely segue into other topics. Let me see. So that's kind of what I've definitely reflected on. Let me check my notes. So yeah. I mean, other meta thoughts or philosophical thoughts that I have somehow encountered is that there's a term called chirality in chemistry, which is essentially a way to signify that our world, that our current world, like essentially that we live in, is, I think, right chiral, if I'm not mistaken. And what this means is that the symmetry it's skewed to another side. And I had the thought where if you look in the mirror, is your reflection truly you? That's kind of a simple question. And I've been thinking about that because is your reflection you, or a completely different version of you? And that's the same question that you should ask when you're working with this chemical elements. So I don't know why that thought came to me. It's because I probably saw one video in the past. But I think that's it. Oh, yeah. One other thought that keeps lingering to me is that the amount of information that we needed to know has significantly dropped, while at the same time, now we have an understanding problem, which we cannot really afford because we have quite a churn of information. And that's something that I think is somewhat like it. I think one good aspect of these AI models is that they have essentially reduced our cognitive bandwidth that we waste on redundant items, especially if we have to do the same thing over and over again. They definitely simplify those steps now. And now they have completely transformed the way we work, because now we're just doing or becoming somewhat of a prompt monkey. And that's kind of difficult, because just being a prompt monkey or an agent monkey that just presses on a few buttons and gets things done, while that is absolutely nice, it kind of subdues us to just one channel, which feels uneasy, but it might be the new paradigm. But it definitely feels uneasy, and it somehow feels so wrong. However, I think that's always what it feels like when we probably get a transformative technology like this. So that was kind of my thought. And one other thought that kept coming back to me is the concept of superstition and hyperstition and beliefs. And it is often the case that if you have a very smart mind, it causes you to it's so hyperstition and superstition is different from connectionism. So that was the point that I'm trying to make. And connectionism is essentially, trying to fan out or connect to as many, sources as you can, and then absorb as much information as you can from these sources, and then digesting that. However, it also comes at a cost of, like it comes at a cost of developing hyperstition or superstitions, and it's often the case that, like, you might have seen it. It's often the case that, let's say, you might have a bias for certain numbers compared to others because you probably have been exposed to these numbers throughout your life, and you have a tendency to pick certain numbers over the others. And unless you're very conscious and aware of these subtle nudges, people call it subliminal, messaging or whatever. I don't like that word, but I'll keep the subliminal aspect where it's just below your main attention span, that it slips by you, and it accumulates over time and grows in a latent manner, and it eventually emerges at some point and really surprises you where it originated from. But it's still kind of easy to trace with a little bit of reflection, and it can definitely emerge from there. So that's something that I definitely thought about. One other thing that I have been doing is trying to fit $750 billion, not billion, parameter model. Sorry, my man went for money immediately, but it's like 750 billion parameter model into a chip for inferencing, and that's essentially ties back to the previous topic of inference processing units, and essentially I've kind of reviewed Cerebra's inference chip patents a little bit, as much as I could find with the public information, and essentially, like, fitting the 750 billion parameter model or more, it requires a very sophisticated etching and very sophisticated strategy into how you would reduce power consumption, and also clever full architecture that can really achieve the throughput that is needed. And the thing is, streaming tokens it's kind of a linear process, but I've seen a few startups as well, like Inception, coming out with a way to stream tokens in somewhat a multi-dimensional manner, instead of just streaming linear token, word for word. You're kind of trying to stream a paragraph in a single shot. So those are kind of the little growth attempts that the industry is making in the inference market, and the reason I'm excited about this is because it's kind of the feedback loop to in the software cycle, there's a simple infinity symbol that signifies the DevOps process. So you develop, and then you optimize the operations, and then you go back to the development. So it's this continuous infinite growth cycle. And there's a similar graph for training and inference, where on the one hand, if you train super humongous models, you'll probably expand the knowledge base, and you'll have a very bigger model that you can ask from, and essentially you can feed that back use that as a feedback. So if you scale training, inference requires a different infrastructure to run on. And I feel like now, as I've mentioned in the past, inference is kind of the the next frontier that I think is worth exploring beyond training. And I think that is all. And one other thought related to maximum extractable value is that it's kind of funny that money is becoming irrelevant in the sense that, like, of course, on the day-to-day, let's say you use your dollars to buy food, to pay for rent, do this basic utilities. But at the core of it, it's kind of an illusion. And the reason it's an illusion is because a dollar is a form of token. It's called an IOU. An IOU, if you don't know what that is, it's literally a shorthand representation of an IOU. That means I owe you something. So here's the certificate for that, and then it's called a dollar. And similar to any other fiat currencies, bonds, or whatever it is, we're essentially, trading certificates, which are sort of credentials. Like it's a commemorating credential for whatever job that you did, and then you get a piece of that paper. On the flip side, it's kind of funny that I'm now signifying wealth in terms of generative capacity. For example, you can think of it this way. In the past, the kind of signifier of wealth was essentially if you are able to, let's say, generate $1 million from your business. That was impressive, right? Now I think the next, essentially, then the next step was crypto tokens emerged, and if you can launch your own token, and that crypto token kind of creates a hub or a capital of sort that people gather around and build something useful around it, that was kind of interesting because it brought somewhat a different civilized view of money, in the sense that it fragmented a community into different chunks or memes or non-fungibility. And now it even got finer. That means essentially it even got really refined into tokens, or in the form of tokens, where each word that possibly an LLM generates has some sort of value that it delivers. But how much of that really lands an impact is still a question, because it's essentially the case that most of the information that it was trained on, or these LLMs were trained on, the output is giving a probability of success, and a probability of success doesn't really guarantee results always. So you have to kind of iterate a little bit on the outputs that you get. So that's why people are going for the frenzy of agents, though that's not really something I would go after. However, I think in the near term, what I'm seeing is an ultimate fusion, or an ultimate intersection between the concept of tokens in the crypto world, or whether it be in the regular traditional finance world, and the tokens, or the ultimate emergence of tokens as a unified tooling. And you can think of it this way. So if I speak good to you, if I speak good things to you, in essence, I'm kind of delivering positive value. And essentially, I'm sending you good tokens through this camera, or through whatever platform that you're seeing me on. And you're receiving these tokens. So there's this sort of brief exchange over a platform, or whatever platforms. So if you can think of it, most platforms are token exchange platforms, whether it be the video that you're watching on, which is like Instagram or YouTube or whatever. These are like token exchange platforms, except these tokens are somewhat pixelated, and essentially the value delivery happens somewhat in an air-gapped manner, and the value delivery is also somewhat asynchronous. That means you can watch this at whatever point in time, and you'll get that value. The point that I'm trying to arrive at with this thought is that essentially token generation at this point is a signifier of wealth. What I mean by that is kind of the current heat of the race is that if you notice, people are just kind of heralding different token generation, potentials that they arrive at. So whether it be imagine you have a large model like the 750 billion parameter model, which was actually GLM, which was an open source or open weight model. And these open weight models kind of give you the opportunity to pull these you can pull these open weight models, and essentially after you pull them, one thing that you notice is that if you run it on even the most performant hardware, with the most performant or essentially the highest amount of RAM storage. And here, for example, I do have a 512 gigabytes of RAM and everything. And however, even with quantization and then with expert routing, in the sense that you don't really have to pull in all the weights of the model or all the parameters of the model into the memory. So you choose an expert routing. So you choose the expert network and you route that into the RAM whenever it's needed. And you just do that with a significant level of caching. And that was interesting to discover, because in some sense that's kind of a workaround for limitations in random access memory. And this was very interesting because and even then, the amount of tokens per second that I was able to achieve, unfortunately, was 2 tokens per second, which was a little disappointing. So that kind of granted me the thought to further explore what it means to be really wealthy in this day and age. And it's not really $1 million. So if I tell you, for example, if I were to give you a business that generates $1 million per second, and not really or actually per month, and if I gave you an actual chiplet or an actual compute device, call it an inference processing unit, that generates 1 million tokens per second, I would very much rather go for the 1 million tokens per second. And here's why. The reason is because words are really powerful. Well, we know that, and it's kind of, it has been established long before. And if you can't be able to iterate on those 1 million tokens per second, that essentially equates to that essentially equates to, I would say, in probably in trillions. So that's like a single unit. So let me multiply it in my head. So even with a single day, you have 86,400 seconds, and you're way already at 86 billion tokens per day. And with a month, you're roughly, so if you even take 100 billion tokens per day, and that's essentially 3 trillion tokens per month. And you can imagine how much value throughput that you can have. And assuming you have the whole agent infrastructure sorted out and whatever. So I feel like that's true wealth. If you can also think of it this way, if you have the ability to keep speaking even while sleeping, or somehow generate thoughts even while you sleep, which you do, by the way, in the form of dreams, but that ability to continually generate thoughts, it's kind of a continuous learning pipeline that eventually helps you. And on the other side, you have your constraints with storage, where storage can be a little hard to come by. Essentially, storage is going to be a little difficult, because it's like if you're generating 1 million tokens, the good part about just if it's just tokens is they're pretty cheap to store. But I would say your iteration speed always matters in whatever like business, and tokens are now just at the forefront or of kind of the limiting factor in terms of throughput, in terms of iteration speed that really gets you out the door. So maybe now that I have kind of reflected a bit, I would up the number a little bit. I would say if you have an inference processing module that generates, so I'm not talking about clusters, by the way. So it's like, the current state of the art with even ChatGPT and everything is achieved in, mega data centers, and not just mega, probably giga data centers. And this is achieved through like large power consumption. So what I'm thinking is in a basically small, low power computing mode. So that's essentially some direction where I see at that point that definitely exceeds thought generation path and whatnot. So I think that's a fair stoppage for my video. And I really do hope you're doing well. I hope you're enjoying my videos. And I try to put out my thought more and essentially just go through what I think and how I think about the whole superintelligence arena, and particularly why I'm very interested in building capital superintelligence. So some of the notable folks in the industry are essentially, there's Safe Superintelligence, which is heavily focusing on the safety of superintelligence when creating a superintelligent being. While I value that, I feel like most of my experience comes in the capital market space, and I believe there is always like incentives are kind of a big driver. Essentially, if you go after a unit of value, whether it be in the form of money or whatever, I think that could be a very good incentive to create useful things, and I think that could be a way forward for creating a superintelligence being. And the reason I didn't opt for the converse, which is superintelligence capital, is because I think it's often the case that I strongly believe that capital should precede superintelligence, in the sense that definitely superintelligence is a good seeding ground, and superintelligence creates a fertile ground. However, if there are no people or somewhat of a unit of value that we can share, it doesn't have to be money, but it's some sort of unit of value, then I think it's not really worth going for. So that's why I kind of opted for a very domain specific go-to, where I simply just thought of, hey, I think capital and superintelligence, the combination of the combinatorial effect of that is absolutely going to be amazing. So that's particularly why I'm building in that arena. So if you definitely enjoy these videos, make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a like as well, so that it reaches to more people that we can essentially build together with. And if you have any questions, please leave in the comments or say something in the comments. And I hope you have a great day.